My name is Stacy DeVoe, and I'm happy to be able to partner with Eric, who is the Wildlife Education Coordinator at the Arizona Game and Fish Department, to bring you, this is one of several workshops that we've done together, Bald Eagles of the Southwest. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Eric. You can join me in giving him an applause and welcoming him. Welcome, Eric.
All right. Well, thank you, Stacy. I always appreciate doing these, and I appreciate your efforts to help make this happen. These are always kind of interesting and fun for us. Now, this workshop is, I actually was working with our Bald Eagle guys and got their most recent version of their presentation that they do, and I was trying to find places to cut, and there was so much stuff that I felt was important for you guys to know. So this one's going to be a little bit longer, so we're going to try to, I'm going to try to go through some stuff as quickly as we can. I should indicate, well, let me go ahead and say who we are a little bit. I work for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. We are the state agency responsible for managing the wildlife in the state of Arizona, so we are the government agency, the state government agency. As a government agency, we get a lot of misunderstandings often about who we are and what happens. We are not a generally funded agency. We don't come out of the general fund, so we don't come out of your tax dollars. So you're not sales tax dollars, income tax, those types of things don't come out. We don't get any of that. We don't collect any of that money. Ours is all self-sufficient. We're a self-sufficient organization, so mostly it's based off of what we would call a user pay system. A lot of that is funded through hunting and fishing license sales, as well as an excise tax that goes through the federal government that's on shooting equipment, fishing equipment, those types of things. There's an additional tax put on those types of things that go to fund wildlife conservation. Eagles, on the other hand, are a little bit different. Eagles are primarily funded through a heritage fund, which is the same thing that I'm funded by. And this actually comes from the state lottery. So when you pay your $1 or $2 or whatever it is for the state lottery, a portion of that money goes to what's called the Heritage Fund, which comes to preserving Arizona's heritage, which a lot of that is wildlife. So our Eagle program is largely funded out of that, as well as some other partners that come in and fund. But from the Game and Fish perspective, it is funded through the Heritage Fund that comes through the state lottery, and that's where I come in as well. Then I am the Wildlife Education Coordinator for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. So although I have a biology background, I am not one of our biologists, so I won't claim to be a bald eagle expert on any level. I've worked with our bald eagle guys. I've gone out on some of their banding efforts, and I work with them on education a lot, and we have a good relationship, and that's where I've gotten some of this presentation. So I will do my best to answer questions that you have, recognizing that I may not be able to answer all of them, but I will try to find you that answer in a follow-up. I am a former middle school science and social studies teacher. In my position now, I get to do curriculum development, teacher training, all those types of things. So we're going to go ahead and get started then, because we're not here to learn about me. You're here to learn about bald eagles. So we're going to start with a little bit about bald eagles, and the focus of this is obviously going to be bald eagles in the Southwest and primarily Arizona, because we're a little bit different than the rest of the country, the way it goes. So we'll briefly start with history of bald eagles in North America. There were the oldest bald eagle remains were found in a Colorado cave, and those were aged to about 670,000 to 780,000 years ago. The earliest estimates indicate that prior to European arrival and settlement in North America, there were an estimated 250 to 500,000 bald eagles in all of North America. And that greatly declined, and the declines were the result of a number of reasons. During the mid to late 1800s, there was a reduction in the prey base through the loss of bison and waterfowl populations. Poisoning of large carcasses to control livestock predators actually occurred. A lot of people don't realize, and we'll talk about this later, but bald eagles do on some level a certain amount of carrion. They eat a certain amount of carrion and dead meat when it's available. And so that, when we poisoned those animals, it actually made an impact on bald eagles as well. Of course, the expansion of human populations, deforestation, the human activities, that's going to play an impact. They were also collected for feathers. Their feathers were used, and they were collected as trophies. And so humans made an impact. And then in the 1940s, we introduced this nasty little chemical. It was an amazing chemical, but it was a nasty little chemical called DDT, which was used widespread to control mosquitoes and as a crop pesticide. Unfortunately, DDT, and we'll talk about DDT a little bit later because it plays an important role in the story of bald eagles, but the principal metabolite, DDE, inside DDT actually impairs the normal calcification of eggs. So it actually affected egg development of bald eagles, and that was a significant part of their decline. Nationally, where are they distributed? Obviously, you're just looking at the 48 contiguous states right here. Hawaii doesn't have any bald eagles, and Alaska is often kept sort of off to their side because their bald eagle population is doing quite well. It's never really been threatened or endangered. It's sort of a standalone population. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2007 estimated that the bald eagle population was at about 10,000 pairs. So we went from up to maybe 500,000 bald eagles in North America prior to European settlement, all the down to basically 20,000 bald eagles in 2007. Nationally, there are about 7 population centers of bald eagles, and that's helped sort of feed the recovery because they are getting better. As most of you know, they've been delisted and lowered, and their status has been lowered, and all sorts of things has occurred with that. But there's been 7 primary population centers that have helped sort of serve as a reservoir for those genes and for the bald eagle populations. And you can see where those are. You have the Northwest, you have one in the South, and they're sort of spread out. Obviously, the Southwest is lacking a little bit, and that's why we're going to talk about. But the Southwest has its own sort of unique features going on here, so we're going to talk about that. In fact, let's talk about Arizona right now. Arizona's records on bald eagles are sparse at best. Going back historically, we just don't have a lot of data. The first documented occurrence of bald eagles was at Stoneman Lake in the 1890s. Now, Stoneman Lake is unique in and of itself because it is only one of 2 naturally occurring lakes in the entire state. We have over 100 lakes that you can find throughout the state, but there's only 2 that are naturally occurring. Stoneman Lake is one of them. Does anybody know what the second one is? The other naturally occurring lake in Arizona. Any ideas? Somebody knows. You can go ahead and just type it in the text chat. Sorry, I'll make that clear. If you know the answer, you can go ahead and type what you think the second naturally occurring lake. Stoneman Lake. It's not too far from Stoneman Lake. It's actually Mormon Lake. Mormon Lake is considered the second naturally occurring lake. All other lakes were man-made for purposes of electrical generation, irrigation, flood control, variety of different reasons, but those lakes were created. And we mentioned that Stoneman Lake was the first documented recording of a bald eagle in Arizona. In the 1930s, the first documentation of bald eagles breeding in a desert habitat occurred in Arizona during the construction of the Bartlett and Stewart Mountain dams. So we started changing the ecosystem enough, putting in some water or making a large enough area of water that they could actually find it as a suitable area to breed. And so we see that in the 1930s is when we had the first indication. So their population, you can see here, going back to 1971 and where it stands now, or where it has relatively recently, since in 2009. These are the number of breeding areas. So one breeding pair is going to be found typically at one breeding area during a year. That doesn't mean that all breeding areas are used each year. But usually often the pair will come back to the same breeding area each year. And so oftentimes what we see is an expansion of these breeding areas. So we can see the number of breeding areas has increased. And some, like I said, some aren't used each year, and that's why you see some declines that pop in there. In 1971, due to concern of the declining populations nationwide, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service personnel began monitoring the bald eagle population. So that's really when we began monitoring it, because there was some concern. In 1978, it was listed under the Endangered Species Act as endangered, and we only had 11 known breeding pairs at that point, breeding areas. Most of those were in the easily accessible regions along the Salt and Verde rivers. In 1985, the Arizona Game and Fish Department began our nest survey effort. And we'll talk more about that effort specifically, using helicopters to access the remote canyons of Arizona's watershed. So we got involved really in 1985 trying to focus on breeding areas and what are suitable breeding habitats for bald eagles. As a result of a biological opinion in 1987, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation funded a multi-million-dollar project to study the ecology of bald eagles in Arizona. So in 1987, there were some funds that were put forward. Due to the efforts of the study and the nest surveys that the Arizona Game and Fish had been doing, Arizona had now documented 36 breeding areas when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service downlisted the species in 1995. So when the species was downlisted from endangered, we had now been able to document 36 breeding areas in 1995. Let's talk a little bit about their morphology and their structure. So we can learn a little bit about them. They are similar. They're white-tailed sea eagle and the stellar sea eagle. They exhibit Bergmann's rule, and if you're not familiar with Bergmann's rule, it basically means that as you decrease latitude, you decrease animal size. And so animals in Alaska, bald eagles in Alaska, are going to be larger than bald eagles in Arizona, often largely thought to be because of cooler temperatures. Cooler temperatures, the animals need to be warmer to stay warm and lose less. If they're larger in hotter climates, they're going to lose heat a lot faster and things like that. So Bergmann's rule is this idea that animals of the same species tend to get smaller when latitude decreases. So the bald eagles in Arizona are smaller than the bald eagles in Alaska. They also, just like all raptors, exhibit reverse sexual dimorphism, which means that the females are actually larger than the males. You can see their approximate sizes there. They get about 3 feet tall. So their diet. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the text chat, and we'll move on. Bald eagles eat fish. They are a fish-eating eagle. Makes them different than the golden eagles that we have here. The other species of eagle, 80% of their diet is fish, of which most come in the sort of the 8 to 12 inches in length. So under a foot typically is the fish size that they're going to eat. But it's not exclusively fish. 20% of their diet is sort of other things that are scavenged on dead animals when it's available as well. However, the prey has to be available for the bald eagle to survive. One of the best examples we have of what happens when that prey is not available is up on the Upper Salt River. Predatory flathead catfish have nearly extirpated native fish populations. Since this predatory catfish can reach upwards of 45 pounds, that's much too large for a typical bald eagle to take as prey due to an absence of suitable prey habitats. And you can see the graphs there as we see the decline in suckers and round-tailed chubs, which would be their prey item of choice along this river. And then you can also see that the productivity actually has been going down as well. So diet then is obviously an issue, and if the fish, and this is going to be something we're going to be talking about, invasive species like the flathead catfish are impacting the available food source. It's not the same just to say a fish is a fish. It's not going to work for them. All right, breeding habitat then. It's very simple in ponderosa pine and mixed conifer because you can put your nest in the top of a tree. When you don't have access to those things, you need to be a little bit more creative. So in the lower Sonoran Desert, we'd find them using pinnacles. They use cottonwood trees. They use snags. And most breeding areas in Arizona are located along the riparian vegetation of the Gila, Salt, and Verde River. So the largest conglomeration of bald eagles in Arizona is found in the Gila, Salt, and Verde River systems. In fact, let's take a look at that because it's kind of unique. So breeding density. In Arizona, most of our breeding areas are spread out over long distancing, averaging about 20 river kilometers per breeding pair. So each pair of birds has roughly about 20 kilometers that they have for their own along a river. But however, closer into Phoenix here in the desert, the Sonoran Desert, due to augmentation that we've been doing, trout stocking, augmentation of fish resources, the lower Verde River actually experiences the highest concentration in the entire Southwest at 5 kilometers per breeding pair. You can see sort of the illustration there, the Salt River and the Verde River, with the Verde River leading sort of the charge, almost 5 kilometers per breeding pair roughly is what we see along the Verde River. So very, very dense actually along the Verde River. So a lot of suitable habitat and prey base for them. Let's take a look at their breeding chronology. What we find is at the southern latitudes in Arizona, Florida, other Gulf Coast states, Arizona eagles start their breeding in the fall. This is earlier than most northern states, but as I mentioned, it's similar to what we find in Florida. We believe, there's a correlation, although we haven't had a direct proof, but we believe that this early breeding is timed to coincide with the early fish spawns that Arizona experiences due to our warmer temperatures. So the fish spawn earlier, so the eagles have timed their breeding to go earlier as well. So what that means is that courtship actually can begin as early as November, but may go into January. The egg laying is going to begin shortly after that, so some will start in December and going all the way into March. And then hatching is going to occur about 35 days after the eggs are laid, so that'll be February to April. And then fledging is going to take place about 12 weeks after they hatch. So this might take them into June. And then as soon as they're fledged and have gotten their wings developed and are able to fly, they start to take off about 45 days after. after fledging, which takes them potentially into July. So they're going to escape out of Arizona for the most part. They're going to escape out of Arizona before the heat comes in. So where do they go? Since we've been doing a lot of our monitoring programs, we've actually been able to track some of the new ones. We actually run a banding program, which I'll talk about in a little bit, where we follow the eggs. We watch the eggs, and as soon as they hatch, we wait about 6 to 8 weeks, and then we actually go into the nest and we put little bands on the eagles. So we've been able to track the juveniles, the babies that come out. Some of the adults that have been around for a while, they may not necessarily be tracked because if they weren't born here or any other things, they may not have the bands. But so we've been tracking juveniles, and we know where they're going. From our studies, we've determined that there are 3 main corridors that bald eagles use from Arizona as they go north. They travel west to the trout and salmon runs of Oregon and Washington. They go north to the trout runs of the Yellowstone Lake area. And then they go east up into Minnesota and the Thousand Lakes region. We believe our subadults and our non-breeders make these migrations as well and return in the fall. Then they start roaming around Arizona to find an opening in a breeding pair or to occupy new habitats. So we believe that most of the adults go with those juveniles and then come back and try to find breeding areas. So that's sort of a brief natural history of these birds and what they do and where they're coming and what they eat. Now we're going to talk about the management a little bit and what Game and Fish has done, as well as many of our partners have done, to help bring back the eagles from basically the brink of extinction and being endangered. So the first question we, of course, need to answer then is why, in general, do we manage bald eagle populations? They breed along lakes and rivers. As they start moving into the warmer months, they go all the way into July. So as those warmer months start to occur, it happens to coincide with much of the high recreation use of those same areas. So that puts extreme pressure on the bald eagles. Human populations and our activities are increasing along riparian systems, and as most of us are aware in Arizona, our riparian systems are extremely limited. And so any new pressures on those can result in some dramatic changes, and we're seeing increased pressures, and that's, of course, could affect the bald eagle. What we have found is that closing some of these recreation areas, and we'll talk about this a little bit, as well as nest watch contractors, are basically becoming a necessity to minimize the human disturbances. Like, we can't get around it because of the bald eagle biology. They just happen to be around people, and so we sort of need to get involved. Flood events and over 100 years of cattle overgrazing have eliminated and changed some of the tree regeneration that we see in some of the riparian areas, which limits some of the breeding areas. There's only so many cliffs and so many pinnacles that eagles can breed on, and those aren't changing. Those are geological processes, and so if we want to increase, we have to have suitable trees that they can breed in, and so when we take those away, that's going to affect breeding potential. Unfortunately, we've also found mercury statewide, and in some cases, we've actually found that mercury level to be 3 times the toxic threshold for bald eagle eggs. So as much as we'd like to think that bald eagles can do what they can on their own, there are other factors out there that sort of make it necessary for humans to become involved. Invasive non-native fish, we've already talked about, have taken over in unregulated rivers. Mortality rates are equal to our recruitment rates and are abnormally high compared to the rest of the nation. So in Arizona, we have a high mortality rate, and it seems to be equal to new birth. You're not going to have any growth. You're just going to have the population maintaining itself. And Stacy asked a good question: is the mercury naturally occurring? Some of it likely might be, but I'm guessing that some of it is not. I have to research that specifically. And Paul, wild burrows, absolutely, that's going to be part of probably the overgrazing that's going to fit in as well, particularly as they go into those riparian habitats. We have found 99.9% of our breeding adults were hatched in Arizona. So we are a very isolated population. It's not that there's not a lot of breeding that occurs within other parts of Arizona or with other parts of the world, the nation, sorry. So we're not necessarily interacting with those 7 other parts. They may migrate back into those areas, but they're not breeding with those. So the genetic pool that we have in Arizona is very unique. And because of those extra pressures, it's going to impact the ability for this population to survive. And Paul brings up another point: lead gunshot from shotguns potentially could be. I don't think we've seen that as much of an issue with bald eagles as we have with, say, the California condor, which is specifically is a scavenger, and we absolutely have that when people leave their gut piles around with lead shot in them. It has become a significant threat for our California condors. I don't believe lead has played a massive role in eagle. I'm sure there's been some cases, but I don't think that's one of the larger concerns specifically. It's not to say that lead gunshot's not a concern. It's just that for this species in particular, it may not be as big of a concern. So one of the things that helps with the management in Arizona is what we call the Southwestern Bald Eagle Management Committee, and I don't expect you to know all this or even be able to read all this stuff, but basically as more bald eagle breeding areas were found in Arizona, the oversight and the coordination of bald eagle management became difficult. So in an effort to increase coordination and communication for the best interest of the bald eagle, the Southwest Bald Eagle Management Committee was formed in 1984, and you can see all the partners there. There are 22 members right now from various federal, state, and local agencies, Native American tribes, and even private organizations are involved. The main goal of this management committee is to continue interagency cooperation and to utilize the information acquired to ensure the long-term conservation of the bald eagle. So this is a case of 22 agencies and organizations that have gotten together for the sole purpose of making sure that this bald eagle remains. Now, the thing to note, and this is something to indicate, no matter what happens, and there's been a lot of concern over the delisting of the bald eagle and removing it completely off the endangered species list, and the fact that a lot of these efforts will be discontinued, that's not the case. In Arizona in particular, all these agencies are committed to this. All these organizations are committed to this. So no matter what happens federally with the listing of the bald eagle and whether it continues to remain unlisted or that it goes back onto being listed, the efforts that we're doing aren't going to stop. And that's important to note here, is that we don't suddenly stop doing these efforts because it's no longer endangered. This is an important animal that we view, and all of these groups have come forward, and so it's not just one agency. So let's talk about the management program. The Oversight Committee and 6 individual projects are coordinated by the Arizona Bald Eagle Management. And we're going to talk about these 6 programs real quickly. Each project identifies and collects data on a specific demographic parameter that helps us study the bald eagle. This data is crucial to managing, maintaining, and enhancing Arizona bald eagle populations. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Nest Watch program, which is perhaps one of our most important, and it's very, very interesting, and it's something you guys can get involved in if you had the time during that. If you weren't teaching or doing another job, we actually get a lot of college students or fresh out of college that do this. You can actually get paid. It's a really cool program, and you sit and watch bald eagle nests for a few weeks at a time. We have our Nest Search program, which I've already hinted at, the banding project, our winter counts, and then we do flights and some other heavy metal things. And maybe I have some information in that heavy metal stuff. So let's first talk about our winter count, station numbers. Conducted largely by volunteers and agency workers, Arizona completes 90% of the 115 routes. So there's 115 routes that we're supposed to travel, basically, and we do 90% of them each year, and documents an average of 315 bald eagles visiting our state during the winter. Okay, so this is important because this is different than the breeding season. During the breeding season, we see roughly about 50 to 60 pairs of bald eagles, so about 120 eagles that are found during the breeding season. But during the winter, when other eagles are escaping the colder temperatures, they come into Arizona, and we get upwards of over 300 bald eagles at one time in Arizona, and that's been found through our winter counts. And that's reported every year, and we can survey that and follow that up a little bit. What do we know about our winter populations? On average, we see 302, and actually that number is up to 319 now, according to the most recent numbers from the bald eagle biologists. The number of bald eagles counted in Arizona is greatly influenced by weather, in that the colder it is up north, the more bald eagles are counted in Arizona. We can get some large concentrations, but maybe not to the level that you might see in other parts of the country. Okay. 65% of those that come in the winter are adults. So 2/3 of them are adults. So where are they coming from? From our studies, we have found that our wintering populations travel south from the northern states, following the Wasatch Mountain Range and into Arizona. Some are coming from as far north as the Northern Territories in Canada. And so we've actually been able to document those through a variety of different methods, some of which are some transmitters. You can see that data, and they clearly are following the corridor right down along the mountain ranges. Okay. So that's our winter count. The annual Bald Eagle Nest Survey enhances our understanding of breeding bald eagles in Arizona. Discovery of new breeding areas and alternate nests, coupled with the knowledge of current and historical breeding areas, accurately describes the distribution, status, and annual productivity of Arizona's breeding population. Timely discovery of breeding areas also identifies sensitive areas requiring proactive management from potentially adverse impacts. So when we discover a new breeding area, so eagles come into Arizona and they start branching out. When we discover a new one, by doing this nest search, which means we go to all the existing nests, but we also look at new areas and see are there eagles nesting in new areas. By doing that on a yearly basis, we can actually find these spots sooner and be able to be proactive. And if there's a need for a closure because of sensitivity to the area and high human use, we can do that. We can identify those early, which is really nice. Now we find some interesting things. Our rugged terrain makes this somewhat difficult. After intensive surveys and through the aid of helicopters, we found that bald eagles had a wider statewide distribution than we had previously thought. And you can see an indication there. There's one of these pinnacles, okay, sitting right there in the middle. You can't really access that through anything else, but by helicopter, we could see that there was clearly an active bald eagle nest there. As a result of these surveys, we were able to meet and exceed the goals of the 1982 Southwestern Region Recovery Plan within 3 years. So within 3 years, we were able to exceed the goals that were set out in 1982. Because of the efforts of finding these nests and stuff like that. So that's really kind of cool. All right. So where are the breeding areas? Okay. Bald eagle breeding areas are distributed throughout the state in a wide variety of habitats, clearly through the central and into the north. We have discovered that the limiting factor to population expansion may be the availability of food resources and suitable nesting substrates. We talked about that's why the removal of trees in these riparian areas, the cottonwoods and things like that, through overgrazing and human use is actually impacting that, because that's one of the limiting factors, is just they're not having enough space to go. But you can see those are the breeding areas that we've discovered right now, many of them. Okay, and you can see a conglomeration right there along the Central Lake and river systems, just outside Phoenix. So you can see that in the 70s, populations were going all over the place. Okay? But because we've been doing the studies and the other conservation efforts we've been able to do, we've actually been able to sort of bring that productivity level to stabilize it a little bit more, so we don't have these wild fluctuations. And you can see there how the number of breeding areas has gone up, the number of occupied breeding areas. As I mentioned, not all breeding areas get used every year, but we still see an increase in everything. The number of breeding areas, the number of occupied breeding areas, as well as the number of successful nests. Because just because it's occupied doesn't mean that the birds are going to be successful. Just it happens for a variety of reasons. Some of it's natural. We do our best to try to help, but that doesn't always that's not always the case. In 1978, the Arizona Bald Eagle Nest Watch program began when volunteers monitored a single breeding area below Bartlett Lake. In 1991, a few years later, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service passed the lead for the program to the Arizona Game and Fish Department. And we still house it. We still run it. In fact, you can go on our website. You can actually apply to become a Nest Watch person. The goals of it, number one, is education, and you'll see this in here a little bit. We'll show some stuff on this. Education, contact and educate the public about breeding bald eagles. So when people are coming near a breeding area, we're set up there. The nest watchers are set up there, and they can talk to them. They can sometimes give them a chance. We might have a spotting scope set up, and the people can come in and look through the spotting scope of the nest. Data collection, record bald eagle natural history, habitat use, and human activity. And then, of course, conservation. This has been a key one, and we'll talk about this in just a moment as well. So if something happens, if a predator happens on that, or if a baby falls out of a nest, we can actually, they can alert our biologists, and we can respond to that almost immediately. We've had incredible success with that. In general, there are 20 people every year that are contracted, and they work basically from February to June. They spend 10 days at a time at the breeding area, so you camp out at the site for 10 days at a time. It's 10 to 15 breeding areas, so you work in shifts basically during one breeding season, and then they're stationed at high recreational use areas. So like that pinnacle that you saw on an earlier slide likely might not have a nest at that area, might not have a nest watcher at that area, basically because it's so inaccessible to people. We're most concerned about the impact that people might have on this. And so most often they're the ones closest to the metropolitan Phoenix area. And as Stacy said, this might very well be sort of an adopt a nest program. And so annually during the first week of February, the 20 individuals get together and we basically do a training. We hold 2 meetings at the beginning of the season to help educate the new contractors on their job responsibilities and actually launch their careers into wildlife conservation. So it's a really cool opportunity for people to get their foot in the door and get some experience doing some stuff that some of our conservationists do as well. It's not always that exciting. Sometimes you're literally just sitting there in a chair with your binoculars looking at a nest, because you're not going to be right at the nest. You're going to be across the river or a ways away from it. After orientation, the nest watchers will be spread across the state to the bald eagle breeding areas with the highest recreation pressures. Stationed on site for 10 days at a time, nest watchers collect a variety of data on the bald eagle nesting behavior, their prey base, what are they eating? So you follow them. You watch them and say, oh, they just dove in and grabbed. You try to identify the fish that they're eating. These are general people that have come in but are acting as scientists. As I mentioned, one of their primary functions is education. You can see here one of our nest watchers working with a family that had come up, and they're showing them the bald eagles, again, from a distance. Okay. You can see some here. One of the things they were able to stop, a minor portion of our public is less respectful. These individuals were photographed throwing rocks into the bald eagle nest from 300 feet below, and 300 feet below the river. The nest. They didn't necessarily see what was in it, but they started throwing rocks at it. But this is something that our nest watchers were able to deal with. The nest watchers contacted these individuals soon after this incident, educated them about the bald eagles, and helped direct them out of the closure. Then, of course, there's data collection. You can see here, oftentimes most people do not even know when they're entering a bald eagle breeding area, like these rafters that are floating down the river. Here they are floating down the river, and there is a nest right above them, and they have no idea that it's even there. But if these rafters were to stop and camp for the evening, the nest watchers would approach them and talk to the individuals, educate them about bald eagles and their sensitivity during the breeding cycle, and would basically ask them to kindly move out of the area, maybe camp in another area. Most people are respectful, and they happily will avoid causing any disturbances to the breeding attempt. So those rock throwers are minor in comparison to the vast majority of people that realize, oh wait, I'm in the wrong area and I need to move on. So we will actually close off parts of a lake or a river during the breeding season of some areas, so that because human use is too much and we can't stop everybody or it's too sensitive. Statewide, Arizona has 16 of these closures, which may include restrictions on land and or waterways. Like that example, the people throwing the rocks in, we actually had a land closure as well. They weren't supposed to be in that area. The Arizona Bald Eagle Nest Watch program helps enforce these closures by educating the recreating public about bald eagles in the area. Often our nest watchers will have to get on a boat. They'll see a boat come into the closure area. They'll go in and approach the boat and just say, hey, look, this is a closed area. Did you see the buoys? You're supposed to be on the other side of those. And so it's a pretty big role. And again, we continue this every year. There's an example of a closure area. And there's some eagles just kind of hanging out right by the closure area. The Bald Eagle Nest Watch program collects data on all kinds of human recreation within the breeding area. This data you can see here is an airplane just sort of doing some sport training right in the area. It's something, you never know. It seems like each year there's something new challenge that we have to deal with. Like this one here. Here's a paraglider basically that's gone into an area. These are things that, 20 years ago or whatever, when we started the program, you wouldn't have necessarily expected these. So every year there seems to be some sort of new recreational pressure that they have to deal with. But we actually can use that. It's reported to the Southwestern Bald Eagle Management Committee to proactively address and impose new management to counteract problems and threats which may impede successful breeding attempts. So we use that information the Nest Watcher is giving to see if new actions need to be taken. For example, as a result of the low-flying aircraft you saw on our last one, the Southwestern Bald Eagle Management Committee, with help from the FAA, was able to designate a 2,000-foot advisory above all bald eagle breeding areas. So we went to the FAA and we said, look, these types of aircraft, we can't have this because that can be just as bad for the bald eagles. And so they implemented a 2,000-foot mark above the bald eagle closure sites. So you can see it's a large program involving a number of groups that have to be involved in this coordinated effort. The common goal, of course, is to protect the breeding attempt from the birds. There are certain stages of the breeding cycle where just flushing an adult from a nest may cause the breeding attempt to fail. So if the timing is right, even just scaring that adult off the nest could be bad and may result in those babies not being able to survive. The good news is we've had some success. One of the bonuses to having the Nest Watchers constantly monitor the breeding attempt is the ability to help rescue individual nestlings and adult bald eagles in life-threatening situations. Most of the rescues involve replacing nestlings that have left the nest before they can fly and rehabilitating those that broke a bone in the process. But others can entail supplementing food to one adult for months when the other disappears, or raising nestlings in incubators and cross-fostering those who lost their nests to floodwaters. So you can see here, a majority of them, and these are ones that have been able to be saved, we have them, they get blown off the nest. The adult disappears. Maybe it's killed while it's hunting. They get caught in fishing tackle, which is a significant problem. Construction, injured, all sorts of things that can happen. Maybe they start choking because they weren't able to digest things correctly. There is some lead poisoning there, so there's some indication, at least with the young, that lead poisoning could be an issue. In preparation for their first flight, nestlings often grab a hold of a branch or a stick in the nest and flap feverishly to exercise their wings. These sticks and branches can break, and the nestling plummets to the ground. On the ground, the nestlings are susceptible to predators like coyotes, bobcats, and mountain lions. This nestling fell from the nest 3 times before we discovered it had cataracts and was actually blind. So we were able to discover that, though, because of our Nest Watchers. They watched this thing fall 3 times and realized, wait a minute, there's something not right. They called their biologists in. They went in and discovered that this animal was actually blind. Normally, the rescue team will arrive on site within 2 hours and recover the nestling. However, bald eagle nestlings on the ground can be very mobile and secretive. It can take hours to locate an injured nestling without the constant observation of the Nest Watchers. So you got to remember that the Nest Watcher is stationed quite a ways away from the nest still, is going to watch it fall. They're going to try to watch as much as possible, but it may take 2 hours for our people to get there. They will get there as soon as they can, but they're stationed out of Phoenix, and they've got to get wherever they can in the state, and they'll go in there and they'll try to get the animal out as best they can. If the nestling has been out of the nest for a long period or it has not been fed in a while, we'll bring it back to health by simply offering food and trying to hydrate it. Hydrating is accomplished by placing a soft rubber tube down the nestling's throat and pushing water through a large syringe. And you can actually see them doing that right there in the picture on the right. If the fallen nestling is deemed to be in good health, we simply return them to the nest and bid a fond farewell. So we will actually send our people up there and put it back in the nest. Typically, and this happens with our banding as well, the adults, they kind of get a little ticked off and they fly above for a while. They might try to pick up a stick and throw it down at the people, but ultimately, some of the adults that have been around for a while, they kind of know the drill. Especially when we do the banding process, they just sort of go off to the side after they get ticked off for a little bit, go off to the side and wait for it to all to finish up and be done. However, falling from a cliff or a tree nest over 50 feet off the ground can have its consequences. Nestlings with broken bones or other obvious injuries are transferred to Liberty Wildlife. And I know that it looks like we have some people from Liberty Wildlife here. We take them there to be rehabilitated. At the rehab facility, their injuries will be mended and braced. They'll be fattened up, exercised, and released back into their natal area. This one that's in the picture fell over 100 feet to the ground. We believe it tried to grab some branches on the way down and actually hyperextended its tarsal ligament. So basically, it bent its knee backwards. So it was taken to Liberty, and as much as possible, we try to rehab them, or they try to rehab them and get them back. Often our rescue missions sometimes become a little bit more complex and involve more coordination with other groups. Living in the desert Southwest, a small rainstorm can have drastic effects to our watersheds and the animals that occupy those areas. Bald eagles that nest in trees similar to the one on the left can find themselves in precarious situations. You'll see that tree that you see on the right flooded underwater is the exact same tree that you see on the left. Okay? And so when the nest is there at one time, you're going to see that it'd be quite easy to get to that bird. You can climb the tree. But then when you've got water now, you have to coordinate with another agency and get the boats and make sure that effort's out there. Now you've got to try to get this eagle either that might be in the water or actually try to coordinate how you're going to get this eagle out of the tree that might have fallen. So they present some unique challenges. So our guys sometimes have to get creative. You're going to see some of that creativity in just a minute. Through the help of the Southwestern Bald Eagle Management Committee members, we have many resources on hand to help us combat those life-threatening, eliminate the logistical concerns behind a rescue. Now, it should be noted that for the most part, Game and Fish does not have those things. We have a couple aircraft. We don't have a helicopter. We have some boats, but oftentimes we have to work with other agencies and other nonprofits and groups that have those and are willing to share those. We get a lot of private companies that are willing to do that and donate their aircraft for the time for this. So this is why this collaboration has been extremely important, especially at times when the water levels are increasing 16 inches per hour, which is what we find. The nest is 6 feet out of water, and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which is the case here. This particular nest on Alamo Lake contained 2 bald eagle eggs. We recovered the eggs. One hatched in an incubator at the Phoenix Zoo and was raised in an imprint-free environment until it was 4 weeks old. So we were able to not have that bird imprinted on. And birds, it's notorious for becoming imprinted with humans and then basically not recognizing that they're birds anymore and really not being releasable. And so the Phoenix Zoo was able to raise this one and make it releasable. And that's the case that this was a very fast-moving lake that came. It just rose so quickly and was going to basically threaten to drown out the eggs and the birds that were in it, which was a significant threat. You can see here sometimes how that has to happen. On the right, you see a picture of a baby eagle being fed. But it's not being fed by a parent. It's being fed by actually probably somebody at either Liberty or Phoenix Zoo. I don't know this specific picture, but they're actually using a puppet. That is an eagle puppet that they put on their hand. And this is one of the ways that they deal with the non-imprinting. They think that they're still being fed by an eagle. Okay? So as corny as it might sound or whatever, sometimes we have to be a little bit creative with some of this stuff. So we weren't able to put it in the same nest because that nest was now underwater. We had to put it with some different parents. So we found a nestling that was roughly the same age. Both the wild and the zoo, the birds just started feeding it as if it was their own. They really didn't know the difference, and both of them fledged. We had incredible success with that one, which was really cool. So that was a nest that would have failed entirely. The birds had abandoned it. The adults had abandoned it because it was being flooded over. We were able to take the babies out, fledge the one, or raise the one with no imprinting and put it back in the wild, which is really, really kind of cool. Okay. Unfortunately, not all of our rescues are from natural causes like weather. Monofilament and fishing tackle has been found in nests or entangling nestlings in 1/2 of the breeding areas in Arizona. So 1/2 of our areas where they're breeding, there's fishing line that we find in the nest. Usually bald eagles encounter monofilament when they capture fish that have broken the line. So you're out there fishing, the fish breaks the line, has the hook still in its mouth or whatever, and it's still carrying that fish. It's still carrying the fishing line. The bald eagle goes and catches it and gets that cord sometimes tangled up or sometimes it's sitting in the nest. These fish are brought to the nest to feed the nestlings, where the monofilament can get caught around their legs and actually tie them to the nest so they can't get out. And I'll show you some pictures. There's an example right there. At the orientation, we actually train NestWatch personnel on the signs of and the procedures to follow if they suspect NestWatch or monofilament entanglement. Through their help, we were able to eliminate the problem before it escalates into a life-threatening situation, so they can start to recognize behaviors that the eagles are exhibiting to realize that, hey, maybe they're caught up in the nest. Not all fishing tackle is as obvious as monofilament trailing from a fish. During banding, this was actually when we had the animal in our hands, we're banding it, we discovered this nestling had a hook inside its talon. The small portion you see is the eye of the hook, and the remaining curved portion with the barb is inside the talon, I believe. Without constant monitoring through the NestWatch program, monofilament situations can become even more serious. This nestling had a hook in its mouth. The trailing fishing line went around his head and through his mouth again, severing the bottom of his tongue. It continued around its body and legs, was caught in the nest, and reemerged around the legs of its sibling. So this is one single monofilament line that had actually tangled up two birds and actually attached them to the nest. They were stuck on the nest. And more serious still, nestlings can die from becoming entangled in monofilament. This is one such case. We have a lot of success, but oftentimes at an unmonitored site, monofilament had wrapped around the nestling's neck, preventing it from swallowing food, and this nestling had actually died of starvation. Again, it was an unmonitored site. We only monitor 10 to 15 of these a year, because that's all we can do, so we're not going to catch them all. So we've been initiating a monofilament recovery program that began in 2003. We placed bins inside department stores. We put them out on the site. And so we try to tell people to dispose of their fishing line properly. Don't just leave it sitting on the rocks where you've been fishing. So now we get to our banding project, which is my favorite part because this is one of the parts that I've actually been able to be involved in and has been kind of cool. In 1987, researchers began a comprehensive program to assess current population dynamics and viability in the future. As a requirement of this two-stage project, we must band every single nestling that's hatched and identify every adult bald eagle breeding in Arizona. So this is our goal, and we're successful with this. As we go in, and every successful hatchling, we put a band on. So that we can trace these, and you can see the goals of the project. You can see it sometimes gets a little precarious. That means we actually have to go into the nest. And so there's a guy, one of our biologists. I don't think he works with us anymore, but you can actually see him climbing the tree to get to the top of the nest. Okay. In order to band the nestlings, we must first gain access to the nests. Bald eagles utilize a variety of nesting strategies, the most common being large riparian trees. These come in two forms, alive, which is actually I should see here, alive, and then of course dead. They use snags. In addition to large riparian trees, bald eagles can also build their nests in large riparian trees. This slide shows one of our nests in the White Mountains. For reference, the man, you can see a man in the bottom of the picture, he's about 6 feet 4 inches tall. That nest is 113 feet up in the air. A snag on top of this tree. By using the Salt River Project's bucket truck, we eliminate the possibility of breaking the nest branch with a climber's weight. And so there becomes a safety issue not only for our climbers, but for the nest itself, that we could actually step onto that dead branch and break it. And so SRP has come forward and allowed us to use their bucket truck, the same one that they use on their electric power lines, and work on allowing us to go into the nest with those, which saves quite a bit. Arizona bald eagles are the only bald eagle population that uses cliffs as a nesting substrate. Accessing these nests can be risky, as some have extreme consequences. Now there you can see that the nest is 200 feet from the top of the cliff. Where that circle is, it says 200 feet basically, that's the nest. It's a 1,200-foot fall down from there. Okay. So what do our biologists do? Most of the cliff nests are accessed by anchoring to the top of the cliff and lowering one person down on a rope. Okay. However, since we live in the Sonoran Desert, anchoring can sometimes be difficult to find something that's a suitable way to hold a person, so we have to improvise. In this case, we're anchoring to a truck because there weren't any large enough plants or rocks that we could actually anchor to. And sometimes we have to get even more clever, because the Arizona bald eagles not only utilize cliffs for nesting substrates, but an isolated pinnacle. In this case, you can see the guy actually had to take a ladder down the river a little bit, and then had to climb up a different side of the cliff, and actually use the ladder to stretch across to the pinnacle and cross on the ladder. Okay. I don't think I could do that. As much as I might love eagles, I'm not sure I could do that. That might not be the job for me. And we haven't, this nest is still a nesting area in Arizona, but we have not, the eagles haven't used this one in a while. I've talked to our biologists, and the one that we deal with in particular has never had to go out on this pinnacle yet. This one hasn't been used in a few years. So our guys have somewhat been lucky on that perspective. If everything goes well, and we can actually get to the nest, we can actually enter it, and we can secure the nestling. So there's a biologist who is not with us anymore, but he's in there and is able to grab the babies. And again, the parents are around. They've usually been flushed out a little bit and are flying above us, screeching or yelling at us, and then they usually perch off on a branch or a cliff somewhere on the distance and sort of watch for a little bit. The nestlings are then placed basically in a modified duffel bag equipped with air vents and reinforced seams. The bag is then above on the top of the cliff. The bag is raised up to them. and the biologist actually stays in the nest until this is done. So he sends the birds up or down to the crew that's going to do the bands, and this person just hangs out in the nest. Oftentimes what he's doing is he's inspecting the nest for monofilament to make sure that there's no fishing line in there. He's checking to see if they're eating, to get an idea of their diet, those types of things, while he's waiting for his colleagues to finish. And here's what they look like when you pull them out of the bag. It keeps the nestlings also from grabbing the biologists or their siblings during the process, and that's what those booties are used for. Is they actually that's to prevent them from grabbing each other when they're in the duffel bag or grabbing our biologists when they're trying to work with them. Stacy asks, why can't the guy at the nest just ban them? Because it's usually a two-person job. Somebody's got to hold the bird, and then the other person's got to take measurements. And then you also have the distraction of you kind of want to get them onto a more secure surface. If something happens, you don't want to be on this narrow little nest area where some of the babies could fall out, the biologists could fall out, all those different types of things. And then what is the age limit for nest watchers? I believe you probably have to have a college degree, but you can actually go on the website under our employment area, and you can actually see, I think it's posted all the time on there. Spy versus spy. And then how are they lowered to the ground? When the biologist goes down, there's another rope that's lowered down with him, and the duffel bag is up, and we actually have people that are watching to make sure that when they're pulling it up, they're not banging it along the side of the cliff. We have to watch and say, okay, are you clear on this side? And we try to pull it, and we have to move it clear of various various rock faces and stuff like that on the cliff's face. So here you can actually see the biologists doing their work. The guy on the left actually is Tuck, and he's the one that's actually provided me with the information here. You can see they're measuring beak, and they measure feet, and they weigh them, and they do all sorts of different stuff. If you've ever had like a large dog that when it's a puppy, it has these really large feet. Well, eagles are kind of the same way. They've got these really large feet that they grow into. And that's why we can put the bands on them at this time as well, because their feet aren't going to get any bigger. So we can secure the bands to them, and their feet aren't going to grow out of them or grow against them or anything like that. But you can tell by the size of their feet. The larger ones are going to be females. The smaller ones are going to be males. Let me see. There's an example of the bands. We're actually taking the measurement of the feet they're printed on multiple sides, and they have a number and a letter associated with them, or some kind of other identifying factor, and they're unique. You can do the best you can to identify them through binoculars or spotting scopes, so that you can tell what animal it is that you're looking at. Okay. Here's an example of some of those bands. During bandings, that they're netted with a unique identification mark that tells us who they are and where they came from. We'll document all that, so we'll know that 1D was found in this area. You can actually see the federal band on the left-hand side, which is a specific band that they require, but it's very difficult to see that band in the binoculars. So we have these other design bands that we can look at. The banding process normally takes about 2 hours, and the adults usually return to the nest within 2 hours of our departure. While not life-threatening, the time we keep the adults away from the nest can cause stress to the nestlings, especially on hot days. So before we return them to the nestling to the nest, we will give them a drink and spray them down with water. This helps reduce the stress. So here they've been sprayed down a little bit. You can see him opening his wings and getting sprayed. And then the nest watchers get involved. The second stage of the banding and visual identification project involves reading the identification band on the breeding adult. We have banded over 300 nestlings. After 5 years, some of those nestlings return to our population to breed. By reading the unique symbol engraved on each band, we are able to determine the age of the bird, the sex, where it came from, and how long it stays in the breeding area. This part of the project is the most time-intensive. Attempting to read the band, which is only about an inch tall, without becoming a disturbance to the breeding adults, can take days or weeks. So it can oftentimes take us a long time to figure out what animal that is. You have to get the right shot. The bird has to be positioned in the right area, and you don't want to disturb them further. So once they've reached breeding age, we can start tracking them a little bit. And what have we discovered? Further evidence, most of the nestlings will breed within 150 kilometers of where they were born. Okay, so the vast majority of those that are born are going to breed within 150 kilometers of that area. This heightens the importance of ensuring that Arizona produces as many nestlings as possible for population expansion. So if we want to see more bald eagles, we have to make sure that they're breeding here and they're breeding successfully here, which is why we've implemented all these protections and all these management processes, because they're not coming from other areas. They're coming from here in Arizona, and they're coming from close to where they were born. In the 1970s and the early 1980s, bald eagles were scarcely banded with a single band on one leg. In 1987, we began placing a unique identification band on the nestlings. So it was in 1987 is where we've begun this process. Where you can see how much they're moving in and out of the population. You can see that they're really not. The blue line there represents percent of adults from Arizona. The green, we don't know where they're coming from. It doesn't mean that they're not from Arizona. It just means that we don't know where they're coming from because they might have been around since before we done the banding. And then, of course, that line way down at the bottom there is the ones that are coming from other states that we've physically been able to identify from other states. So clearly the majority of them are coming from Arizona. We know that because of this banding project. And there's some age-specific information. This, Stacy, will answer the question that you were asking earlier. They tell us how healthy our adult population is. The average age entering the population for a male is 5 years. So they go away for a few years, and then they come back after about 5 years. And the age of the breeders typically starts at 5 and goes up beyond that, but we have had males that have bred as young as 3 years and have gone as old as about 23 years. And then for females, that we've seen some females that are actually older than 28 years old that we've been able to identify. So they can live a decent length of time. And Paul is indicating that he's seen a few along the Bill Williams River in Lake Havasu that they're banded. Oftentimes you're going to find them banded. If you look closely, you may not be able to see the band, but you can see the I number on it, but you can see that they have a blue or red or yellow or whatever kind of band on them. We've also defined the average tenure of an adult and the average pair bond duration for our population. So this gets at the earlier question about do they mate for life? They do, but they often switch out later. One dies for a variety of reasons. A single adult will stay at an area for about 10 years, but we've seen them there longer. This is sort of what our research is indicating. So the other part of this is to look at the heavy metals and parasite analysis. The most significant decline in bald eagle populations came from the widespread use of DDT in the 1940s. Even though DDT was banned in 1973, it is still found in the environment and in some areas at toxic levels to bald eagles. Each year we collect dead eggs and eggshell fragments. So one of the things that they're doing in there is they're collecting the eggshell fragments. We're actually going to run tests on those eggshell fragments and other contaminants that may affect bald eagle productivity. With assistance from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we also sample fish within bald eagle breeding areas to test for contaminants. Finally, we monitor the occurrence for the Mexican chicken bugs. These are a cliff-dwelling, blood-sucking parasite that can cause dehydration of the nestlings through blood loss. So this is what the person who's in the nest is looking for. He's pulling egg fragments. He's looking for basically these tick-like animals, and he's doing that or she's doing that while the other biologists are up on top of the cliff or down on the ground doing the banding process. So that's another reason why we don't necessarily want the same person doing all of this. There's a lot to do, and we want to minimize that. And we try to limit this to 2 hours basically as much as possible. And they can get it done a lot faster as well too. So 2 hours is pretty much the long part of it. DDT, through its metabolite DDE, causes the calcium eggshell to become thin and easily broken. We've discovered that Arizona bald eagle eggs are at threshold levels of being affected by this contaminant. So it's still there. What we find is that basically that the egg becomes thin, and then when the parents sit on the egg, they crush the egg, and that's the threat that we have, and that's why we don't have reproductive success. If they find parasites, do they treat the nest? Sylvia asks. It depends, and there's actually a video that I would encourage you to check out. It's free. I was going to run some videos as part of this presentation, but most of our videos that we put on are on YouTube, and I wasn't sure if people were going to be accessing from their school site, and so I didn't want to have an 8-minute video running, for example, and somebody couldn't be watching it for about 8 minutes. But we have there's a 12-minute video that's actually this tick infestation that we've been monitoring for a couple years in this one nest, and then this year we actually tore the nest down and tried to relocate the nests nearby. And it's a fascinating video that I would encourage you to watch, Sylvia, which might address your questions a little bit more on how they deal with those a little bit. And this will be the first year, this year that we're getting into. This nesting season will be the first to see if the efforts were successful, because we just got rid of that nest this year. And so you can check that out. And that's on, if you go onto YouTube and you search for Arizona Game and Fish, we have our own channel, and you can search for eagle, and there's probably 4 or 5 bald eagle videos that are on there that you can check out. So let me continue here just a little bit. We suspect that DDT still present in the environment is in locally restricted concentrations. During major flood events, the toxin is leached throughout the watershed and is actually absorbed in bald eagle's major prey items, fish. DDT is one of those chemicals that actually goes through biomagnification of concentration because it's stored in fat. It's often stored in the fat of an animal or the fat tissue. So as an animal eats that, it actually accumulates more of that. Over time, the contaminant settles once again. The levels of contaminants in the fish decreases. Thus, the fluctuations we observed in the thickness of eggshells. So we see these fluctuations largely associated with flooding events and things like that cause these. And you can see here we are in 2011 when we're still seeing the impacts of what that can be. Luckily, it seems that if you look at that graph, that we're largely on a downward trend with that thinning, which is increased productivity. In addition, methylmercury, a byproduct of the mining and lumber industry, so this addresses our question from earlier, has been found in bald eagle eggs statewide, and in one case at levels 3 times the toxic threshold. So some of our mercury is a result of some of our mining practices. What I did want to show you is just some of the laws that have been passed to protect bald eagles. Okay? You go all the way back to 1900 with the Lacey Act, which prohibits the importation of illegally kill an animal that has been killed illegally. You can't transport them across state lines, is what the Lacey Act did. So you now couldn't kill an animal, whether it's a bald eagle or an elk or anything, illegally without a permit, and then transferred across state lines. The 1918 Migratory Bird Treaty Act protected it. The 1940 Bald and Gold Eagle Protection Act prohibited the take, possession, or sale of any bald eagle, alive or dead, including any part, nest, or egg. 1967, of course, we had the Endangered Species Preservation Act. It was listed as endangered south of the 40th parallel. The 1975 Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species, the CITES, focused on the protection of plant and animal species from unregulated international trade. And then, of course, you have the 1978 Endangered Species Act. The bald eagle was listed as endangered in 43 states. It was threatened in 5, and it was not listed in Alaska and Hawaii. It established 5 recovery regions to set recovery goals and monitor populations. In 1995, the bald eagle was downlisted to threatened in all recovery regions, and recently it's been removed from the list. But the point of showing this, though, is to say that even with that removal, and even if it remains removed, and there are still tools in place, particularly not just these laws, but that Southwestern Bald Eagle Management Committee that I told you about, that we've been highly successful with bald eagles and what we see in Arizona, and we're going to continue those efforts. And I think it's success to be able to say that we were able to take this off of the endangered species list as well. So let's talk a little bit about some education ideas. Now, these are just some ideas to get you started depending on the age of your class a little bit. I have 4 or 5 of these, and then I'm going to show you some resources, and then we're going to try to wrap it up here pretty soon. So one is eagle eyes. Eagles can see their prey from over a mile away. They can get up in the sky a mile away. So what might be fun is to have your students compare their vision to an eagle's vision. And so you get out on a large field, whether it's a field at your school or at your park or wherever you happen to be, and find some sort of object, a mouse-sized or a fish-sized object, and place it on the ground and have the kids walk away until they can no longer see that object again. Measure that distance. And again, we have some full lesson plans that have been developed that I'm going to be sharing with you in a minute. But these are just some ideas. Pesticides. We talk about the impact of DDT. And you guys have seen this experiment, I'm sure, where you remove the eggshell using vinegar, and you actually can show the membrane that's in there. So one example would be to simulate, pretend the vinegar is DDT, and it strips off the eggshell and thins the eggshell. And then what happens then to that egg as you start to put weight on that egg versus a regular egg, which can store more weight. So the kids can sort of visually see what's happening to DDT and the process that DDT is having on an eggshell. Very simple. So you can ask the kids, what do they think? Have them research it, come up with what are the advantages of keeping it on the endangered species list, what are the disadvantages of keeping it on the endangered species list, and have them write a short essay explaining their position. Why do they believe that? Just some thoughts. And then legends, something that we found obviously is Native Americans hold eagles to be very have a special place in their culture. And so have them research a Native American tribe found in Arizona and their beliefs about the eagle. Where did it come from? What was its creation story? What is it? What is its purpose? Does it have a role? What kind of role does it play in the community? And the last one I'm going to share with you on this part is looking at the legal protection. Okay, have them look at those laws. This would be good for some of the more advanced students. Break them into groups and have each of the groups look at a different law. And what was the purpose of the law? What was it successful? How did it impact raptors? Because many of these, obviously the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act was passed for a very specific purpose, to protect bald and gold eagles. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act did the same thing, was passed to protect migratory birds. But the Lacey Act was not specific to birds. And so what impact did it have on birds? What impact did it have on raptors? What impact does it have on eagles? These are all things that you can have the students sort of research and look at. And so these are just some examples of the lessons that you could incorporate into a class. There are a few links that you can actually get into. There's the Arizona Game and Fish Department, our Bald Eagle program. It's a long website, so make sure you get both of those lines. The last thing, and I was miscommunicated this a little bit. This actually should have been a little earlier, but there's a nice little slide, and I believe I got this off of the Southwestern Bald Eagle website on the difference between osprey and bald eagles, which are two of the raptors that you're going to see on water, and sort of compares and contrasts them a little bit. So that would be an interesting one. If you had the opportunity to go out to one of these sites with your students and actually have the students look at an animal and see what they're identifying. Here's some of the videos the Bald Eagle Special is a 26-minute video we produced recently that was designed to go on like PBS or something like that. And it's a really cool bald eagle video. There's a few other ones. There's a video on bald eagle banding. There's one that's Arizona Bald Eagles, which is just music. It's just music and these bald eagles flying around. Bald eagle release. There's the eagle nest down. That's the one about the parasites that invaded. And then there's an eagle rescue where the nest, again, there were some that were some babies that were in danger and had to be moved. And all these were created for our PBS show, Arizona Wildlife Views, that we air. So these are segments that go on those. They're 8 to 12-minute segments usually. That's it, really. So any more information, you feel free to contact me. There's my phone number. Email is probably the best way to get a hold of me. That's it. Thanks for attending, guys, and sticking with that.